We're continuing on with the Brahma Viharas and we're on to Metta. And my title of the talk is Metta Translation. So, when many people first encounter Buddhism in the West, one of the Pali words they learn is metta, M-E-T-T-A, usually translated as loving kindness. And the phrase has become so familiar, it can seem almost inevitable, as though this was simply what the Buddha had originally said in English. But of course, he didn't speak English. And of course, translations carry histories within them. And I learned this a long time ago, that the rendering of metta as loving kindness can be traced to early Western translators of Buddhist texts, and that happened in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And one person who did a lot of translation was um, Rhys Davis, Thomas William Rhys Davids, excuse me. And and he was associated with the Polytext Society that did the translations back then. Um, and these translators were very deeply shaped by Judeo-Christian religious language. Um, and many had Christian missionary backgrounds, and others were scholars, but scholars within the biblical culture. And so naturally, when they searched for English equivalents to Buddhist ideas, Pali words, they drew from what they knew, the spiritual vocabulary they knew. And so that phrase, loving kindness, it had already existed in English Bible translations. And so the phrase carried a sacred resonance for these translators. Um, and for Western readers, people learning Buddhism. Um, but every translation also shapes perception. Today, many Buddhist scholars point that metta may actually be closer in meaning to friendliness, goodwill, or unconditional friendliness. Oh, I don't like that unconditional friendliness. But anyway, than to love in the emotional or sentimental sense. Um, and actually, the root of metta is related to mita, M-I-T-T-A, meaning friend. And so that small linguistic shift can change the feeling of the practice because loving kindness can sound exalted, it can sound demanding, but friendship, it feels much more human, more ordinary. Um, a friend presents without requiring perfection. And so that's why we often use the translation of friendliness and reflective meditation. I much prefer that translation. I didn't grow up with that kind of wording, loving kindness, or that kind of sentiment, maybe I should say. So it doesn't really resonate for me. Um, and in fact, when I worked on there's sort of a byline on I think that's what it's called, on the Pine Street Sangha website. And one of the first words is befriending meditation. And that's really the direction we go. So, traditional metta practice often involves a repetition of phrases such as, may I be happy, may I be free from suffering, may I be safe, may all beings live with ease. And there's different phrases that are repeated, and they're sometimes repeated in a different order. And when I first learned metta practice, they changed it around. It didn't start with may I be happy. It often started with somebody who it was easy to be happy, somebody we actually felt friendly towards and for. And that was because a lot of people felt so much the opposite of feeling friendly towards themselves that when they said it, it was a bad way to start. So they shifted it around. But nonetheless, this can be really feel good. It can be feel beautiful, and it's got some time behind it. Like this is really a time-honored practice. And sometimes for many people, through repetition, they do feel more benevolence towards themselves and towards others. And really, over time, the emotional habits of heart can change genuinely. Though reflective meditation really approaches all of this somewhat differently. Rather than trying to cultivate a particular state, we become much more interested in how are we relating to our experience? Where is the friendliness in how we are relating to our experience, especially when we feel difficulty, especially when our experience does not match our ideals. So, we can often, when people come to meditation, they discover that the mind can be impatient, it can be self-critical, it can be frightened, it can be restless, etc., etc. Probably that's why people shy away from meditation because they don't want to tune into all that. And when they feel that, it's sort of almost an impulse to try to correct or overcome it. But here in reflective meditation, we invite another possibility, the possibility of experiencing these difficulties with friendship before trying to change it. But I'm not talking about passivity nor resignation, but really just becoming more friendly, more intimate with how things are. And we are so conditioned for self-improvement. And I'm thinking maybe especially people who choose meditation, I think it can be sort of like an unconscious, underlying, unaware um, reason for choosing meditation to improve oneself. So I don't think that's really what it's about, nor do I think the Buddha was pointing that way. I think he was more pointing towards having a wise relationship with oneself, with one's life, with one's experience, rather than self-improvement. Because, and this is so important, suffering actually increases when parts of our experience are pushed away, when parts of our experience are treated like they are the enemies. Um, but more, if we think of metta as friendliness, it's really the willingness to know these difficult states and to be a bit more friendly with them. And so, again, we have to know what's going on in our inner worlds. We have to become more aware of things such as disappointment, loneliness, anxiety. Bet we're all familiar with those, and we could add to the list, right? And rather than immediately trying to fix these things, just pausing long enough to feel into the truth, but this is just part of being human. And that moment of non-rejection is actually metta. So we don't tend to replace traditional loving kindness with those phrases, but rather we sort of widen the field. We don't only ask how do we cultivate friendliness, but what makes it hard? What makes it so hard to feel friendly with our experience? And what conditions allow friendliness to emerge more organically, more naturally, with less pressure? So the Buddha didn't ask us to become idealized beings before awakening was possible. He really, I believe, invited us to have a more careful and caring observation of our human life. So in reflective meditation, we think metta, that's where metta begins, and maybe that's where metta stays, not by achieving some kind of perfect state, but in learning not to abandon our experience, by learning to be friendly with our experience. So that's where I'll end the talk for today, and we will move on to being with our experience and not trying to be ideally friendly with our experience, but just being willing to be with it. So welcome this morning to anyone who may be new